Welcome to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to have you with us this week. We're welcoming a new contributor. His name is Ellis Scherer. Ellis, thank you so much for joining us. Take a moment, would you please, and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, thank you very much for having me on. Excited to discuss some important topics with you today. As you said, my name is Ellis Scherer. I'm a policy analyst for broadband and spectrum policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation in our great nation's capital of Washington, D.C. We're the premier science and technology think tank focused on a broad swath of issues. Of course, as I mentioned, my focus is on all things broadband and spectrum policy. And today, I hope you and I will have a very productive conversation about a topic that I think is not on too many people's radars and yet affecting folks across the entire nation in copper theft and fiber vandalism. So again, thank you for having me. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. This is something that wasn't on my radar screen, but now that it's there, I'm like, how could I not have even considered this? Now, when we talk about tariffs, I know people may have different feelings. On principle, I'm opposed to tariffs because I think it's a kind of tax and I just want less taxes. But in particular, Trump has been putting out a lot of different tariffs, and it's easy to think, well, that doesn't really affect me. I'm not a manufacturer or I'm not importing anything, so I don't really have to worry about it. But his tariffs on copper have had a very interesting effect. And let's talk a little bit about why that is. First of all, copper, as I understand it, is well, it's been going up in price to the point that did I hear correctly? We're not going to be making pennies anymore.
That's correct. And, what sort of spurred this news was Trump's announcement of a copper tariff about a month ago. And what we saw was actually the single largest single day hike in the price of copper. And I think the critical piece of this that you alluded to that escapes people, right? Because of course there's a discussion of are tariffs effective trade policy? And I would refer you to some of my incredible colleagues here at ITIF on the trade specific stuff. But we don't think about is those externalities, one of which is as the price of copper increases, we have seen consistently throughout the last 40 years of American history, the incidence of copper related crime also increase. And what that has been in years past, particularly just in this last year, is people who rely on copper telephone networks, both for voice services, but also for broadband services, they are losing their connection because thieves are going in, ripping up cables out of the ground, cutting them down from the sky to try and steal copper wire that they will then take to metal recyclers and try and sell for a profit. And those profits are going up as the price of copper increases from this Trump tariff.
So the incentive to steal that copper must be pretty high. In other words, if the price has been artificially elevated through scarcity or tariffs or whatever, now they have a greater incentive to go out there and steal it. And I mean, anyone who knows people in the construction trades knows that construction sites that are left unattended will often see thieves come in and steal the electrical wiring just for that reason.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting point because obviously my main focus is how this is impacting broadband networks, but it's not just broadband wires that are being cut. It is light posts. It is all sorts of copper infrastructure across cities. And I sort of mentioned this at the top, but it is really an issue that is affecting communities across the entire country, from California to Texas. Just this week, we've seen a number of incidents in a single county in North Carolina, and it's dire in some situations. I mean, today, people really rely on broadband connectivity from everything to the call that you and I are having right now to more important things like emergency services. And so when they lose this connection because vandals are ripping up copper, it at times can really put lives in danger. And not to be too extreme about it, but that is the stakes that we are talking about in some cases. And one additional point I want to make as well, the focus here is on copper, but often what happens is thieves or criminals who get the idea in their head that they can turn a profit will go hunting for copper wire and in turn actually rip up and damage fiber or other wireline technologies thinking that it's copper. So it's not just copper customers who are suffering from these incidents, but as we can get into, those of Americans who are still reliant on a copper connection often face more dire circumstances when these outages do occur.
Ellis, help me have some perspective as far as I think you allude to in the article that copper, as a technology is outdated compared to say fiber optic. To what extent are people dependent on copper compared to say 20 years ago or even 10 years ago? Has there been a pretty big shift away from those copper based networks toward more fiber optic, or are there still essential, infrastructure systems and broadband systems that depend on it, as if it's modern technology?
Well, in an incredible way, all of the above is true. And in fact, the reality where all of those things can be true is part of the problem. So yes, old telephone networks were primarily copper based. Today, we have seen a large shift in the market away from copper as the primary technology to newer technologies such as fiber optic cables, such as coaxial cable. Think of your cable providers like Comcast or Charter, as well as newer technologies coming onto the scene like fixed wireless access with 5G and even low Earth orbit satellites. At the same time, policy and the infrastructure has lagged behind the market. So I think latest numbers from the FCC last year showed that about 8% of Americans are still reliant on a primarily copper network. And for those folks, when their networks are damaged, it takes longer to repair because as the market has shifted, the components required to fix copper networks aren't really being manufactured as widely anymore. There's a level of expertise that we are sort of losing in terms of folks who can conduct these types of repairs, and which is why it's so important that we try and transition networks fully away from copper. And as I allude to in the op-ed, what this tariff really does is highlight two policy changes that are necessary in the world of broadband. The first is, as I was just discussing, states should be walking back what are called carrier of last resort requirements, which I can get into in more detail, but those basically require a carrier to continue to upkeep their copper networks because of an old law from the era of telephone. But what that's doing today is making it so they cannot upgrade the networks to something else. If states walk those back, we can move on from copper networks and folks can be connected via a better and newer technology. And of course, the second of which is at the federal and at the state level, there needs to be a shift towards including the entirety of broadband networks in protected critical infrastructure. So that way when this damage does occur, criminals can be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law.
And that was actually something I wanted to ask you about as far as the criminal penalties. Someone who is caught, in possession of stolen copper. I mean, obviously there's theft depending on the amount that they have. It could be varying levels of theft. Does this elevate that to basically a heavier crime than just simple theft?
That's right. And it's interesting because the nuance of the policies is different state to state and even at the federal level. So, starting at that federal level, there is a federal law called the Malicious Mischief Law, say that 5 times fast. And basically, that law should be expanded to include privately owned infrastructure, not just public infrastructure. At the state level, states just need to be more inclusive in what they consider critical infrastructure that is punishable by law when it is damaged.
Well, for anybody who's been wondering, well, I don't see how tariffs, might affect me. I think you've given them some food for thought today because clearly there are backdoor ways that this affects all of us, and this one, it turns out, is actually a lot more important probably than most people realize.
100%. And I don't see any sign of these trends of incidents of copper theft and fiber vandalism slowing down. So I hope that people become aware, coordinate with your local law enforcement. If you think you've seen an incident of copper theft or related crime, please report it to local authorities. As important as state and federal laws are, efforts at the local level are critical to ensuring broadband networks are protected as well.
Once again, we are talking with Ellis Scherer. He's a policy analyst at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation and a contributor for Young Voices. Where can people find you and follow you on social media?
You can find me on X at Ellis Scherer, on LinkedIn at the same name, of course, on the ITIF website where I publish stuff on all sorts of different broadband and spectrum related policy pieces.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we are happy to welcome a new contributor to the show this week. His name is Tate Kaufman. Tate, welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be here. So I'm a third-year law student at Antonin Scalia Law School in Arlington, Virginia, but I'm originally from Calgary, Canada, which is located in the province of Alberta, just above Montana, Idaho area. It's a beautiful province on the eastern edge. It's got nice wheat fields on the western edge, the Rocky Mountains, and up north we've got the oil fields, which is the major provincial source of income. So people call it the Texas of Canada. It's got a big oil and ranching culture. And you can see my little bolo tie here, accustomed to wearing those around our rodeo festival, which is the Calgary Stampede, which is the largest outdoor rodeo on earth. So,
well, and if memory serves, there is a bit of an independent streak among the residents of Alberta. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about an article that you've written for the Calgary Herald about true sovereignty has to start with a written structural constitution. Now, you're going to have to bring me up to speed. I know I've heard some rumblings that that there's a sense of we want independence in Alberta. Tell me where does that stem from? Where does it stand?
yeah, so Alberta independence is sort of unique within Canada. When people think about Canadian separatist movements, they typically think about Quebec trying to separate from Canada, which was really huge in the 1970s and has sort of been resurgent throughout Canada's history. And in its own way, which I'll get to later, sort of plays a role in one of the reasons why Alberta is now seeing its own sovereignist movement. But to understand where this sort of comes from historically, I think it's important to understand why the people of Alberta are maybe a bit different than the people in the rest of Canada, which is that the migration trends to Alberta when Canada was developing as a country were quite different than out east in Ontario or along the western shore in British Columbia. Because British Columbia has three different mountain ranges, the Cascades, the Interior Mountains, and the Rocky Mountains, it was largely impassable for most of early Canadian colonial history. Likewise, on the east, it was pretty easy to get through the St. Lawrence River into Quebec, Ontario, the Great Lakes region. But once you hit the eastern edge of Ontario, you're into the the western edge of Ontario, you're into the Canadian Shield, where the topsoil isn't very deep, so you can't grow much. And then you hit Manitoba, which is about 70% lake. So there's not a whole lot of land to set up shop, very difficult to navigate, difficult to get through. And then Saskatchewan, once you've made it through all that, Saskatchewan is sort of like North Dakota, northern plains. You can grow a bit of grain, but still was not the best agricultural place at the time. So it was very hard to make it to Alberta coming in from the east or west in Canada. So most Albertans, early Albertans who settled, were actually would-be American immigrants. They came through the ports of New York. They moved west along the Oregon Trail, or my own family actually was on what was called the Mormon Trail, which was the path to Utah, and then decided to turn north for cheaper land. So they made their way to Montana, to Nebraska, to Utah, and then instead of settling those areas, moved north. So ever since the start of Alberta and Saskatchewan, which are the two sort of mainstay prairie provinces, there's been a different ethos than the rest of Canada, a more fiercely independent ethos, a more sort of maverick, maybe even industrialist, sort of get down to work ethos. And they've had very different cultures from the rest of Canada since the beginning. So that is compounded by the fact that, as I mentioned, Alberta is an oil economy. It's an oil and cattle economy. And it's also landlocked, which means it's very difficult for us to get our resources to other nations without collaborating with our provincial neighbors, be it British Columbia or sending it out east. But Canada allows provinces to erect trade barriers between each other. So, for example, British Columbia notoriously imposes liquor taxes back and forth between itself and other provinces, where it's hard to get wine in or out without getting an additional tariff imposed. So Canadian provinces are actually very aggressive with tariffing each other. And when it comes to oil, where you need pipelines to get it out, that's become a major sticking point, be it environmental concerns or being used as sort of a pawn in other interprovincial battles, or the fact that if the oil can't get to market, it makes it cheaper within Canada. And that makes manufacturing in the East with oil a lot cheaper to do, boosting their economy. So there's a lot of different reasons why other Canadian provinces would have a motive to not allow the oil to get out of the country. So from the start, from that sort of difference in ethos to the contemporary economic situation, Alberta's always felt like a bit of an outsider. It's not necessarily felt like it's been well surrounded by friends. And in the sort of past decade or so since Justin Trudeau got elected, that's only gotten worse. The carbon tax came in, which of course dealt a huge hit to the Alberta oil economy. And then just recently, we saw when Donald Trump imposed his tariffs on Canada, the first instinct of most other Canadian provinces and of the prime minister at the time was to suggest an export tax on oil. So to actually tax Albertans for shipping their oil out of Canada and doing a sort of preemptive tariff. And all this has sort of set the stage, in addition to cultural differences, for Albertans to really feel like we need to set out on our own. We'd be better off on our own, we'd be more economically productive, and importantly, we wouldn't have to pay what are called equalization payments, which is this constitutional scheme in Canada where, to put it generously, the have provinces have to have an amount of their tax revenue delegated to support services in the have-not provinces. Now, one of the issues with that is because Quebec held so much weight around the negotiation of this formula, because Canada has a very recent constitution. 1967 was the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There were two constitutional accords in the 80s and 90s, and Quebec wielded a lot of weight. So what Quebec did was they made equalization vastly benefit them. And that includes not counting things like hydroelectricity exports, but also the net benefits to something in the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars over time without ever paying a cent into equalization. So Alberta wants to separate. But in my view, Alberta as a separate nation or as a separate society won't be very successful unless it can fix a lot of the problems that it's trying to escape from. And a big part of those problems is Canada's failure to clearly separate its executive, legislative, and judicial power. Now in Canada, we're still ruled by a monarch. We still derive our power from the King of England. But the way that practically plays out is that there's a prime minister who is the head of the legislative assembly, or pardon, the member of the head of parliament, who is the chief executive and who can appoint all the judges. And on top of that, the judges have adopted largely what they call living tree constitutionalism, which is in effect the idea that constitution isn't something that's set in stone. You don't need to look at the text. You can move forward with modern society. And a great comparison to see that versus American jurisprudence, if you look at Bostock, which was a decision by Justice Gorsuch, versus Vrind v. Alberta, which is the Canadian equivalent on the same issue, same-sex attraction discrimination, you'll see that where Justice Gorsuch sort of goes through and breaks down the textual reasons for it, the Canadian Supreme Court said it's close enough to the other things that are protected, so we're just going to write a new law and write it in there as judges. So we have this odd situation. Yeah. Oh,
We've got to wrap up here, unfortunately, because we are against the clock, but we're talking with Tate Kaufman. He's a Calgary contributor to Young Voices. Tate, where can people find you and follow you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a huge social media presence. They can find me at LinkedIn at Tate Kaufman if you want to connect. Yeah, give me a shout by email. You'll find my email on there. And great talking with you, Brian. Sorry, I took up a lot of air, I think. Went quicker than I thought.
All right.
And we are back. What's that? Here, I can stop.
Sorry. Apology. I thought I was supposed to talk about my background.
You will. I'm just
Okay.
starting the. I'm just starting the recording. That's
Apologies.
all. Okay, so the recording is going. My apologies to whoever will edit the video, but here goes the music. Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Cody Taylor, a new contributor to the Young Voices program here. Cody, this is our first time meeting you on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Take a moment. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Cody Taylor. I'm a current law student at the College of William and Mary. I've spent a few years in DC doing policy work, mostly in antitrust and consumer protection. I think broadly I'm a law and economics analyst and scholar, and that's what I've been doing. And what I plan to do in the future is antitrust law.
Well, I'm gonna, I guess, grudgingly pull you out of the antitrust arena for a bit here. I'm looking at a Substack that an article that you had written, Your Grandpa's Democratic Party, literally. And this one really grabbed me because I know that the Democratic Party right now it's going through a little bit of transformation. And first of all, let's talk a little bit about what prompted this particular article. You talk about Representative Jerry Connolly's tragic death, and I don't know a lot of the background on that. Tell me about what that meant to Virginia and to Democrats in Virginia, and why we're seeing such an aging demographic within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, Jerry Connolly has been my representative for pretty much vast majority of my life. I remember growing up and going to, I think it was MLK Day church service, and he was speaking there, and I was a kid, and now I'm 25, and was the representative until his tragic death. So he's been in office for quite a bit, and that seems to be a trend, not only with Democrats, but with members of Congress in general. You have Dianne Feinstein in California. You had Nancy Pelosi. You had, on the Republican side, Chuck Grassley, quite elderly representatives. And there's nothing wrong with age. Age brings wisdom, or should bring wisdom, and plenty of experience, which is important in Congress. But there is, I think, an upper limit for that. So we don't want representatives that are too young, 18, 17, 16. They don't have enough experience or subject matter expertise or knowledge of the world to be effective legislators. But I think there's an upper limit as well, to which you become a little bit out of touch with where the country's going. And also there's just health and age considerations and mental capacity questions that need to be asked as well. So I think Jerry Connolly being my representative for so long, this was sort of like a personal thing for me. But as I looked around and I was researching, and a lot of the representatives in the state of Virginia, especially on the Democratic side, are up there in age, close to the age of Jerry Connolly. Now, Jerry Connolly had some health issues that didn't really involve his age per se, but we've seen this story over and over again. And I go into that in the piece that I write.
You mentioned in your article that with Jerry Connolly passing away, when was this, back in May that he died?
Yeah.
So now there are three elderly Virginia Democrats running for re-election in the 2026 midterm elections. And I don't know that this is unique just to the Democrats, but in this case, certainly, the youngest is 71, the oldest is 78. There's a lot of experience there, but I keep having these images of, if you remember what Dianne Feinstein looked like the last couple of years of her life. I mean, it just seemed very like an indignity was being committed to wheel her in for a vote or whatever. It seemed like it would have been better to just let her, retire, go out to pasture, whatever it is that former Congress members do. But it seems like the power was the key. Well, we got to hang on to this. And so it seems like maybe that's why there's so much longevity.
Yeah. No, I think that's certainly part of the equation. I had an off-the-record conversation with a state representative in the state of Virginia, and she essentially said something similar about like there is a sort of ego that representatives have. Now, personally, I don't want to, in this piece, I didn't want to highlight that too much, because I do respect Senator Warner. I used to intern for him. Representative Bobby Scott, I've met on a few occasions, and I, there is a respect I wanted to have with this, but I do think ego may play a role in the broader sense of representatives staying in office for so long.
So what are some of the options as far as helping to bring new blood in without a total shift in the focus? And I'm saying this as someone, I don't know inside Democratic politics very well, but I'm guessing that there's probably a pretty significant difference in worldview between the three candidates you mentioned in your article and someone like, say, AOC or some of her contemporaries. Is there friction between the old and young guard of Congress, whether it be Republican or Democrat?
I think so. The Democratic Party is, for the past 8 or so years, I think since 2016, is sort of been soul searching in what type of party it wants to be. Does it want to go down the Bernie Sanders AOC route, or does it want to continue the sort of standard liberal Clintonite path? Um, to me, I think there's certainly a lot of soul searching there. I'm not sure if it's an age thing, but we also live in just a more populist era of politics. And so I think on both the Republican and the Democratic side, there's just this populist fervor. And I don't know if it's an age thing or if it's just a elected politician versus the base, sort of where the base of the party is. Question, but there's certainly a tension between, oh, and in particular on the Democratic side, I think younger Democrats are a lot more left wing than the elected politician or where the party is as a whole. Now, me personally, I think that left wing lurch isn't particularly the best for the Democratic Party in its future, but that's an issue that the Democrats will have to sort out for themselves. But my focus is not necessarily on the policy content, even though that is, I think, important for the Democrats to sort out. But the age is an issue here. Because I think the broader point I'm getting at is that I think the executive branch under both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is just out of control. It's overstepped its boundaries. I think the tariffs issue was really what highlighted it for me, was like, why does one person have the power to essentially shift the global economy with a snap of a finger? And I was like, well, yeah, that's pretty bad. And I think that oversteps the purview of what the executive branch should be doing. And while the Republicans are in charge right now of the executive branch and Congress, I think that, and so my point right now is that the Democrats are the ones who should be constraining this, but I think the general principle is that the executive branch is out of control. Congress needs to reassert its authority. And the Democrats just happen to be the opposition party at the moment.
Cody, we only have about a minute left here, but I want to ask you, are the older political figures, are they keeping younger up and coming figures or leaders from ascending into the ranks and being able to take on some of those responsibilities? I guess are they territorial even among their own party?
That's part of the problem. I think that's part of it, but I think there's just a general inertia that comes with politics of this is just the way it is. I think voters also play a role in this, and that they just have a familiarity with a Mark Warner or a Jerry Conley. And so if a younger candidate shows up, they just might not be comfortable. They just might go with who they know. And so I don't think it's only the elites or the party blocking it. I think there's just a combination of that sort of thing and ego and the voters' familiarity.
We unfortunately are up against the clock here again. We're talking with Cody Taylor. Cody, where can people find you on social media?
I recently deleted my social media, but you can follow my Substack at Cody Writes.
Very good. Thank you so much for your time today. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And we are back. It's our fourth and final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Emily Ekshian. Did I say that right?
Yes, thanks.
You can correct me if need be. She is a Young Voices contributor, and this is her first time appearing on this program. Emily, take a moment. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Emily, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. I work in policy communications at the Crypto Council for Innovation, where I focus on emerging technologies like digital assets and blockchain. And before this, I completed my master's in journalism from Columbia University. And I actually recently launched my own project called the Digital Future Report on Substack to explore how these emerging technologies are reshaping global finance and policy.
And, I'm looking at an article that you have published on the Digital Future Report that's called With the Global Crypto Race Underway, the Senate has one shot to secure America's leadership. I guess I kind of knew in the back of my mind that we aren't the only people, involved in crypto, but help me understand when we talk about the global crypto race, how far reaching is this?
Yeah, certainly. So around the world, we're seeing foreign jurisdictions kind of lead in terms of establishing clear rules for crypto. So, for example, I mentioned in my article that Singapore has become Asia's crypto capital. They offer tax advantages and clear licensing that attract businesses and provide that certainty that businesses like. Similarly, the EU has launched its MiCA framework, and it gives all 27 member states a unified rule book. And, even they're piloting a program that lets tourists convert crypto into their local currency for spending. And this just shows how countries are finding innovative ways to fold crypto into their everyday economic activity. And so what that means is, when we have this competition, we can eventually see talent, capital, and even dollar-denominated settlements more likely shift abroad. And so we're at a really critical point right now. If the US doesn't catch up with this global race, we can essentially risk not only losing innovation, but also weakening the dollar's role in the next generation of global commerce.
Emily, what are some of the things that are causing the U.S. to fall behind?
Definitely. So I would say primarily it's regulation. And so regulation in this field is very necessary, but it's also important to strike the right balance. So on one side, we need guardrails to protect consumers, to prevent fraud, and to give businesses clarity, as I mentioned, so that they can properly operate. And so without this, markets stay in limbo and investors hesitate. And so companies begin moving offshore to more suitable regulatory environments. But regulation becomes a problem when it's written to stifle innovation. So if rules are contradictory or too restrictive, startups can't operate and they can't comply. Their new ideas, in a sense, get shut down. And so we see that next generation of infrastructure moving offshore. And so the key here is to strike that balance, creating trust and certainty and getting rid of that red tape.
Now, I remember back in July, President Trump signed the Genius Act, which I guess stands for the Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins. I didn't know that's what that acronym stood for till I read your article. That addresses one part of the problem. Talk to me about what else needs to happen regarding crypto regulation in the U.S.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, the Genius Act was a good step, but it's not enough without clarity. So, essentially, what the Genius Act does, it narrowly focuses on only a component of the crypto industry, which are stablecoins. And just to clarify for the audience, these type of cryptocurrency stablecoins, they're designed to maintain a stable price, usually by being pegged to a fiat currency or a commodity. So essentially, Genius sets the standards for regulation, how they're issued, how they're backed, how they're kept safe for users. But quite frankly, it's only part of the work needed. And so that's where clarity comes in. And clarity, it kind of seeks to tackle the crypto industry as a whole. It lays the market structure, guidelines. It lays clear rules for classification systems between digital commodities, digital securities, and it also provides guidance to regulatory agencies like the SEC and CFTC on how to approach regulating different financial assets within crypto. So this legislation will be key moving forward, and it passed the House just a day before the Genius Act was signed into law. And the Senate is expected to take up the Clarity Act in September. But my fear is if it stalls, then it will really lose our one shot at kind of securing innovation here at home in the US.
One of the things you point out in your article is that the US has an opportunity here to demonstrate that crypto isn't just a passing trend. And I hear that from people. I'm not an expert on crypto, but I can see enough that I'm like, okay, it's not just a flash in the pan. Okay, this fad has come and gone. But it seems like the people who are determined to treat it like a fad are almost invariably the people who know the least about it.
Yeah, quite frankly, I think that we've seen this in previous administrations. And now, what's surprising about the Trump administration is that they're quite crypto forward. So we've seen real momentum under this new administration, and in the sense that he's kind of revamped leadership at key agencies like the SEC, and he's pushed forward a very aggressive crypto agenda with various executive orders coming into play. For example, he created and established the strategic Bitcoin reserve and digital asset stockpile. He's also recently signed an executive order earlier in August that allows for crypto and alternative assets to be included in 401ks. So in a sense, we're kind of seeing that folks who were in charge of the regulation and who didn't have a good idea of sort of how to approach it. We saw that shift with this administration. And the administration does certainly show that, the US doesn't just want to be crypto friendly, it does want to lead.
Yeah, and you point out as well, though, that legislation's just the start here. So if it gets through the Senate and the Senate passes, the Clarity Act, I guess, is it a cinch that President Trump will sign it if they pass it?
We're pretty confident. Industry is pretty confident that President Trump will sign it. And it's also important to mention, as you said, I stated that legislation is only the start. It's important that the administration takes a look at how to provide guidance mechanisms so that the SEC and CFTC and Treasury and other state legislators could handle their oversight mechanisms within their jurisdictions and allotted crypto assets.
We've got about a minute or so left here. I'm curious, what are the biggest obstacles, or maybe I should be asking, who are the biggest obstacles to moving the Clarity Act forward?
So we've seen good bipartisan sort of uh, kind of consensus around these legislations. Right now, since the Clarity Act is so new relative to the Genius Act, and because it approaches the crypto industry as a whole, as opposed to the Genius Act that approached the crypto industry from one side, which is stable coins, that kind of essence is industry fear that it may be kind of it may be a possible risk for Senate. Senate may be viewing it in that sense. But that's not necessarily true. And we've also sort of, within advocacy measures, we've kind of reiterated that, if we do lose innovation here in the US, we've seen that happen in other industries, like with the semiconductor industry.
I have to stop you here because unfortunately we're up against the clock again. We're talking with Emily Ekshian. Tell us where people can find you on social media.
Sure. So folks can find me on LinkedIn at Emily Ekshian. They can also find me on Twitter at DFR_global and on Substack at Digital Future Report.